my name is Amal Gochenour. I play with the Baltimore Symphony Orchestra, and I'm here to talk to you today about your audition. It's so exciting that you guys are all preparing an audition. It's great repertoire. However, the piece I want to focus on the most today is Beethoven 7. It's such an interesting piece. It's super nuanced. It might seem simple at face value, but I think there's a lot of gold to mine here. The most important thing, I would say, to start to think about Beethoven 7, especially the second movement, the slow movement, but this applies to all of Beethoven as well, is to think about the type of sound you want to use. What is your sound concept? What are the colors you're striving to achieve in your sound? And that can be done through vibrato, through shaping of the vowels, etc. But I think in the case of this excerpt, the second movement excerpt, it's definitely important to consider. So I would think first about the context, what's going on right now when you're playing, starting at rehearsal 99. It's important to note that you're actually not the only solo voice. This isn't really technically a solo. You're doubling two other lines that are playing just 2 octaves below you. So you can't play too aggressively or too effusively. Sometimes I hear it, like this. That's absolutely not really what we're going for. It's very subtle. There's a sense of restraint here. It's almost like a simmering energy, a very subtle energy that remains through this solo line, but it also needs to blend with the rest of the orchestra. And anytime you're in an audition, your job is to be liaison for what the music actually is. Give the audition committee a sense that you know what's going on with the rest of the orchestra, and in turn, they will hear the orchestra in their own heads, in their own minds, while you're playing this line. So I think it's important to remember to play this with a very blended sound, with that subtle energy, and a nice pale tone color. Goes on. So I think just kind of making sure that you're playing it with a sense of expression, but in a restrained way. So I think you can do this a lot with vibrato as well. So thinking about where the vibrato is pretty important here. There are a few appoggiaturas that need to be identified. So it really helps to think about the longer phrases. So the first phrase from the start of this excerpt at rehearsal 99, that's all one phrase. And so I think the peak of the phrase is on that appoggiatura at 102. That's where your a little bit of more emphasis should go, and a little bit more vibrato should go there too. And then the second phrase starts at 103. And again, the emphasis should go on the appoggiatura at rehearsal, at measure 106 on that D natural. So if you think about the phrases, I think here it'll help kind of give you that sense of direction, that sense of energy throughout this entire passage. So keep that in mind here. I think really kind of make sure that your air continues and sustains through the longer notes. So you can even subdivide, and that would help a lot to kind of maintain the energy through the sound. So just to kind of give you a sense of continuing the energy through the long notes, through the sound. Another thing you can do is make sure that, of course, you're playing in tempo. That's obvious. No matter what excerpt you're playing, you need to play in tempo. But sometimes I like to give my metronome a more human element. In other words, I like to actually play some of the accompanying figures myself. record it, and then play on top of that sound. And what it does is it gives you a less mechanical relationship to the music and a more personal, more human musical relationship to the music while still training yourself to play in tempo. So for example, I have, and if you guys don't have this book already, it's the Orchestral Excerpt for Flute Volume 2. I worked on this book, so it's my own personal plug. But other than that, it's a terrific book written by Jeannie Baxtresser. And it has some of the accompaniments reduced down to just piano. And I can pull some of that out and play it myself and then subsequently record it and then play the actual solo on top of the recording. So for example, I did this just really quickly on my computer. So let's pull it up, and I'm going to give you an example of what it's like to record, and you can do this very easily, it's very readable, from the score and use that as your own metronome. So let's see, I'm probably not going to jump in at the right time. Whoops. Okay. Let's see. So you get the idea. I just accompanied myself basically and gave myself more of a musical context instead of just kind of always using the metronome when I'm practicing. But it's also important to take a look at the accompaniment so that you can realize there's a lot of moving, there are a lot of moving notes underneath this main melody. If you have those in your head, if you really internalize them, it again is going to give you that more subtle sense of movement throughout this entire solo passage. So that's just one way I would probably start to work on this, is consider the sound and consider the tempo and the context of this full passage. I would say also there are different spots where you can continue to subdivide. It's very important, especially once we get into rehearsal 107, to make sure that your note lengths are all the same, particularly the note lengths at the end of every phrase. So sometimes here, for example, 107, this is what I hear wrong. So those two eighth notes at the end of those two half phrases were both different lengths. So that's incorrect. You want to make sure that your note endings and note lengths are all the same. So again, just for example, at rehearsal 107, so I was really striving to make sure that those two eighth note endings were of the same value. And you can do this, again, by practicing subdividing through the notes, whatever you need to do, but just keep an eye on that. Beethoven, again, in general, is often a study in contrasts. And there are not that many contrasts here. It's pretty subtle. But you do have the first major dynamic change at rehearsal 106. And that's when you become, instead of the main melodic figure, you become then the accompanimental figure. So keep that gorgeous melody in your head while you play the accompanying 16th notes. I'll do pickups in a 136. So really, I think when you're here, keep the melody in mind when you're playing this so that you're not rushing. I think it might be a lot of our inclinations to rush through this, but remember, you're not playing the melody, so keep that in mind. You could even do my technique of recording the melody, the accompaniment melody, and then playing on top of a recording of yourself. That could be a really great way to kind of, again, internalize the music. And then other than not rushing, I think you do have to emphasize that this is a big fortissimo moment. This is not as delicate as the opening of this passage at 99. And I wouldn't play too short. I would help emphasize the dynamic change by playing slightly longer on the 16th notes. And I'm really trying to make sure that every 16th note has the same value of sound. So I'm really trying to fill out every 16th note so it has the same quality and content of sound, so that again it gives a nice sense of fortissimo without blasting. I don't want to hear too pecky or too edgy. That's just not Beethoven. So keep it a little bit longer on the staccatos, not legato by any means, but it doesn't have to be pecky. It can be quite full, and make sure again that you're blowing and really going into the moving notes as they happen. And then you can make a huge dynamic change. Let's see, I'm going to start at 141. You can make a big dramatic ending there if you want, again, just to kind of show the contrasts. That would be really interesting. But yeah, that's Beethoven 7. Again, it's a lot more complicated than it is at face value immediately, but it's super fun to play. There's a lot really to kind of relish here. I would definitely suggest playing this with a recording, not just of yourself, but playing with a full orchestra recording so that you get a sense of context and character. And then other than that, just kind of make sure that you're working with a tuner and metronome and really trying to have a blended sound. Think a lot about your color here. So that's Beethoven 7.